The pink wheelchair sat completely empty in the middle of a neat suburban house, while the girl who had spent her entire life paralyzed inside it was currently walking down a highway, completely cured, entirely healthy, and completely on the run. On June 14, 2015, emergency responders in Springfield, Missouri, forced their way into a residence to find the blood-covered body of a mother who had sacrificed everything to care for her severely disabled, terminally ill daughter. Yet the complex medical equipment, the feeding tubes, and the heavy medication remained untouched, while the fragile teenager who supposedly needed them to survive had vanished without a trace. The initial panic over a helpless child being kidnapped by a predatory killer was instantly shattered by a single realization. The entire tragedy was built on a massive, decades-long lie. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. To understand how a perfectly healthy young woman ended up trapped in a pink wheelchair, one must look closely at the meticulously constructed world of Claudinea D. Blanchard. Born in 1967 in Louisiana, D. grew up in a family that later described her as a deeply troubled, manipulative individual who routinely stole from relatives and exhibited unsettling behavioral patterns long before she became a mother. The illusion began in earnest in July 1991 with the birth of her daughter, Gypsy Rose, in Chack Bay, Louisiana. Almost from the moment the child drew her first breath, D. began projecting a relentless stream of severe phantom illnesses onto her daughter, initiating a dynamic that would define the next 24 years of their lives. When Gypsy was merely an infant, her mother claimed the child suffered from sleep apnea, a condition where breathing repeatedly stops and starts during sleep. This was only the first brick in an immense wall of medical fiction. As the girl grew into a toddler, a minor motorcycle accident involving her grandfather became the perfect pretext for a massive escalation. D. declared that her daughter had suffered internal injuries that permanently damaged her spine, rendering her completely incapable of walking. From that moment on, Gypsy was confined to a wheelchair, a physical constraint that served as the visual anchor for the entire deception. The medical rap sheet D. compiled for her daughter grew exponentially over the years, transforming a vibrant child into a walking textbook of catastrophic diagnoses. According to the medical records her mother managed to forge or extract from compliant physicians, Gypsy suffered from chromosomal defects, leukemia, muscular dystrophy, severe asthma, epilepsy, and profound hearing and vision impairments. To sustain this reality, D. subjected the young girl to a grueling, invasive routine of daily medical interventions. Gypsy's head was routinely shaved to mimic the appearance of a cancer patient undergoing aggressive chemotherapy. Her saliva glands were surgically removed because her mother convinced doctors that the girl drooled excessively due to neurological damage. A surgically implanted feeding tube, a gastrostomy button, became the primary conduit for her nutrition, bypassing her perfectly functional digestive system to pump a constant stream of heavy, sedating medications and thick formula directly into her stomach. The physical toll of this manufactured existence was brutal. Due to the unnecessary anti-seizure medications and dental neglect resulting from the removal of her salivary glands, Gypsy's teeth rotted away, eventually requiring the total extraction of her permanent teeth. She was forced to wear heavy, painful leg braces whenever she attempted to stand, and she was restricted to a strict diet of sugary nutritional supplements that further deteriorated her physical well-being. Throughout this entire process, D. maintained an ironclad grip on her daughter's perception of reality. She constantly reminded the girl that she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old child, and that she could not survive without her mother's constant, hyper-vigilant care. Whenever they visited a new specialist, D. would do all the talking, weaving a seamless, highly emotional narrative of a devoted saint sacrificing her life for a terminally ill child. If a doctor began to express skepticism or order tests that might expose the lack of underlying pathology, D. would immediately pack their bags, alter the medical histories, and move on to a completely different hospital, ensuring that no single physician could ever look at the complete, fraudulent picture for too long. The physical isolation inside the home created a digital loophole that eventually cracked the foundation of the entire deception. As Gypsy grew into her early 20s, despite her mother fiercely maintaining to the public that the young woman possessed the intellect of a child, the internet became an unmonitored sanctuary. Hidden beneath the blankets late at night, away from her mother's hypervigilant glare, a cheap laptop computer became a portal to a world completely detached from surgical procedures and pharmaceutical regimens. The digital space allowed a severely abused young woman to test the boundaries of her own autonomy, seeking validation, connection, and normalcy through secret profiles on online dating forums. It was on a specialized Christian dating website in October 2012 that a digital connection was established with a 23-year-old man from Big Bend, Wisconsin, named Nicholas Godejohn. The initial exchange of messages quickly escalated into a deeply intense, multi-layered online relationship that spanned nearly 3 years. Through text messages, video calls, and secret late-night forums, a complex psychological symbiosis began to take shape. Nicholas, an individual with a history of profound mental health struggles, low cognitive functioning, and socially maladaptive behaviors, found an absolute purpose in protecting the fragile, high-pitched voice on the other end of the screen. For Gypsy, the young man was not a medical specialist or a charitable donor. He was a romantic partner who viewed her as a desirable adult woman, completely capable of a life outside a wheelchair. The relationship quickly developed a dark, highly compartmentalized architecture. To bypass the inevitable risk of maternal detection, the couple created distinct digital personas to explore their deepest impulses. They engaged in elaborate role-play scenarios, adopting alter egos that ranged from innocent fairy tale characters to intensely dark, violent personalities. Nicholas frequently channeled a protective, aggressive entity he referred to as his dark side, a persona that claimed to possess a ruthless capacity for violence if provoked. Gypsy, trapped in a continuous loop of physical and psychological trauma, found comfort in this perceived strength, gradually shifting the nature of their conversations from basic romantic flirting to a desperate strategy for absolute escape. The digital intimacy was briefly tested in the physical world in March 2015, during a highly orchestrated encounter at a local movie theater in Springfield. Dee Dee, completely unaware of the years of prior digital contact, had agreed to let her daughter attend a screening of a popular film. Nicholas had traveled all the way from Wisconsin, positioning himself in the same theater to facilitate a brief, heavily chaperoned meeting. The reality of the physical encounter was stark. The couple spent a brief moment together in the public restroom, attempting a hurried physical connection, while the mother sat just a few rows away in the dark theater. The severe anxiety of detection and the absolute impossibility of achieving any real freedom under the current arrangement solidified a terrifying conclusion in the young woman's mind. The maternal surveillance was too absolute. A conventional escape was an engineering impossibility. The digital correspondence in the months following the theater meeting took a definitive, calculated turn toward homicide. The prose in the text logs shifted away from standard romantic declarations, adopting a clinical, transactional tone focused entirely on logistics. The logistics involved coordinating travel dates, acquiring a weapon, and mapping out the precise layout of the Springfield home. Gypsy began sending detailed descriptions of her mother's deep sleep cycles, fueled by the heavy sedatives routinely kept in the house. Nicholas expressed an intense, obsessive readiness to deploy his alternative persona to eliminate the single obstacle standing between them and a shared future. The psychological boundary had been completely crossed. The digital escape plan had evolved into a deadly contract, waiting for the precise moment of execution. The digital blueprint transformed into physical reality on the evening of June 14, 2015. The geographic distance between the state of Wisconsin and the residential neighborhood in Springfield, Missouri, roughly 550 miles, was eliminated when Nicholas traveled by bus, carrying a concealment knife that had been specifically procured for the task. The physical coordination of the arrival was entirely managed through a sequence of encrypted text messages sent from within the house, where the unsuspecting mother had already retired to her bedroom for the night. The absolute quiet of the suburban home was broken only by the soft thud of the front door being unlocked from the inside. a deliberate act that signaled the complete breakdown of maternal control. The physical choreography of the assault was marked by a cold, transactional execution. Upon entering the residence, the young man was handed the blade, while the daughter retreated immediately to the confines of the adjoining bathroom. Inside the small enclosed space, she crouched on the linoleum floor, tightly pressing her palms against her ears to create a physical barrier against the impending sounds of violence. The auditory environment of the house shifted abruptly. A sudden, desperate struggle erupted in the master bedroom as the sleeping woman was violently awakened by the first physical blows. The assault was brutal, intimate, and highly concentrated. The perpetrator used his physical mass to pin the victim to the mattress, utilizing the heavy blade with repetitive downward motions. The lack of defensive wounds on the victim's hands suggested the attack was too swift and overwhelming to permit any real resistance. A total of 17 stab wounds were inflicted across the victim's back and neck, severing vital arteries and causing rapid, fatal exsanguination. The physical texture of the sheets, heavy with blood, and the metallic odor that quickly filled the enclosed room marked the absolute termination of the victim's life. Throughout the entire duration of the struggle, the individual in the bathroom remained completely motionless, waiting for the silence that would signify the completion of the deed. The immediate aftermath of the homicide was characterized by a bizarre mixture of panic and routine domestic cleanup. Once the struggle had concluded, the bedroom door was opened, and the perpetrator informed his partner that the task was finished. Instead of fleeing the scene immediately, the two individuals remained in the house to address the physical evidence and secure the financial resources necessary for their flight. A digital camera was used to document the scene, and a sum of cash, roughly several $1,000s that had been sent to the mother by charitable organizations, was removed from a safe hidden within the master bedroom. The bloody weapon was thoroughly wiped down in the kitchen sink, wrapped in standard plastic bags, and placed inside a backpack along with a change of clothes. The transition from the crime scene to the escape route involved a profound physical realization for the young woman. For the first time in her conscious memory, she walked out of the front door on her own 2 feet, completely abandoning the wheelchair that had defined her public persona. The physical sensation of the cool night air and the solid gravel of the driveway under her shoes marked the definitive boundary between her past captivity and her current status as a fugitive. The couple walked several blocks away from the house, eventually securing a local taxi service to transport them to a nearby motel, where they intended to hide before boarding a bus out of the state. The digital footprints left during the escape route would ultimately prove to be their undoing. While hiding in the motel room, an intense psychological tension began to manifest between the two fugitives. The reality of the homicide began to collide with their immature expectations of freedom in a strange, misguided attempt to provoke a police response that would lead to the discovery of the body, because the daughter could not bear the thought of her mother's remains rotting undetected in the summer heat. She accessed the shared family Facebook profile. Using the motel's unencrypted wireless network, she typed a single, highly inflammatory status update that read simply that the woman was dead. The text was stark, vulgar, and completely out of character for the profile, which had previously been used exclusively to post upbeat medical updates and expressions of gratitude to local donors. Within minutes of the text appearing online, the digital community exploded with frantic comments and shares. Friends and neighbors, assuming the account had been compromised by a malicious hacker or that the family was experiencing a severe medical emergency, began blowing up the home telephone line. When no one answered, several individuals drove directly to the Springfield residence, noting that the windows were completely dark and the family vehicle was still parked in the driveway. The absolute silence from within the house prompted a direct call to the local sheriff's department, initiating a chain of events that would rapidly dismantle the decades-long deception. The final phase of the incident block involves the physical journey away from Missouri. On the morning of June 15th, while local authorities were just beginning to secure the perimeter of the Springfield home, the couple boarded an interstate bus bound for Big Bend, Wisconsin. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was heavy with exhaustion and unspoken anxiety. The young man carried the backpack containing the cleaned weapon, while his partner sat beside him, wearing a cheap wig to alter her appearance. the physical trajectory of their flight was moving them toward a perceived sanctuary, completely unaware that the digital post sent from the motel room had already established a precise electronic coordinate for law enforcement. The illusion of a successful escape was evaporating with every mile traveled, as the automated systems of the telecommunications networks continued to log the precise movements of their mobile devices. The physical reality of the dark house on Volunteer Way in Springfield quickly drew the local community into a vortex of frantic speculation, fear, and escalating rumors. By the afternoon of June 15th, the single violent text update on the family's public social media profile had been shared hundreds of times, mutating from a localized concern into an active town-wide panic. Neighbors who had spent years watching the mother wheel her fragile daughter through the driveway stood along the perimeter of the property, swapping unverified theories about home invasions, predatory syndicates, and targeted kidnappings. The local atmosphere grew distinctly heavy, a terrifying realization that if a defenseless woman and her terminally ill, wheelchair-bound child could be violently compromised inside an exceptionally supportive neighborhood, then absolute security was a complete myth. When the local sheriff's deputies arrived at the residence to conduct a welfare check, the physical context of the property initially supported the worst public fears. The family's specially equipped van, complete with a mechanical ramp designed exclusively to lift a heavy motorized wheelchair, remained parked in the driveway, its windows covered in a thin layer of morning dust. The ramp leading to the front door was empty, and the windows of the small, pink-painted house were tightly shuttered, blocking out the bright afternoon sun. Deputies walking the perimeter knocked repeatedly on the side glass, receiving no response other than the frantic, muffled barking of the family's small terriers trapped inside. The total lack of visual or auditory activity from the occupants forced the tactical decision to initiate a forced entry through a rear window, a physical breach that immediately shifted the case from a standard missing persons inquiry into a complex homicide investigation. The interior of the house presented a jarring, clinical environment that completely contradicted the chaotic violence of the crime scene. The air was thick, stagnant, and highly concentrated with the chemical odors of prescription pharmaceuticals, antiseptic wipes, and specialized synthetic formulas. In the kitchen, neat rows of plastic medicine cups and color-coded syringes were stacked beside bottles of heavy sedatives, anti-seizure medications, and liquid nutrients. The living area was cluttered with dozens of framed photographs documenting the daughter's extensive medical history. Images of a bald, fragile girl smiling alongside major celebrities, receiving charitable awards, and posing at high-profile fundraising events. For the entry team moving down the narrow hallway, the space felt less like a conventional home and more like a highly structured, long-term care facility, a setting that emphasized the utter helplessness of the missing child. The structural path led directly to the master bedroom, where the physical indicators of the homicide were stark and absolute. The mother lay prone across the mattress, her body partially covered by the bedding, surrounded by extensive dark biological staining that had soaked deep into the fabric and the underlying foam. The defensive context was completely absent. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, no overturned furniture, and no broken glass within the room, suggesting the victim had been completely incapacitated or caught entirely off guard while asleep. The initial physical assessment revealed numerous deep penetrations along the upper back and neck, wounds that had caused massive internal trauma and rapid death. The absolute stillness of the room, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic hum of an active oxygen machine in the corner, created a chilling contrast to the public image of the household. The secondary objective of the sweep immediately triggered a frantic, multi-agency search operation across the entire region. The pink motorized wheelchair, the absolute physical requirement for the daughter's mobility, was found parked neatly against the living room wall, completely undisturbed. Beside it sat her essential medical equipment, including the specialized feeding pumps, oxygen tanks, and backup battery units necessary to sustain her life for more than a few hours. For the investigators securing the scene, this single visual element was deeply alarming. A paralyzed young woman with the cognitive capacity of a small child had been removed from her life support apparatus, suggesting she had been forcibly abducted by a highly ruthless perpetrator who had absolutely no regard for her physical survival. The search operation expanded into the public sphere with extreme urgency, utilizing state and federal resources to track the movements of a suspected abductor. An Amber Alert was broadcast across Missouri and neighboring states, plastering the daughter's shaved head, oversized glasses, and clinical description across digital highway signs, television screens, and mobile phone networks. The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of tips flooded the local dispatch center, with citizens claiming to have seen a fragile girl in a wheelchair being pushed through local gas stations, rest stops, and convenience stores. Law enforcement units spent hours comforter-combing local motels, checking the storage bays of long-distance buses, and tracking local taxi logs, desperately chasing red herrings generated by a panicked public that assumed the victim was entirely incapable of independent movement. The social echo of the search completely transformed the local community, creating a climate of intense paranoia and collective guilt. Neighbors who had interacted with the mother just days prior expressed profound disbelief, struggling to reconcile the horrific crime with the image of the selfless caregiver who spent every waking hour managing her daughter's deteriorating health. Rumors began to circulate that a transient criminal or a volatile collector from the mother's complicated past in Louisiana had tracked the family down to settle an old financial dispute. Volunteer search teams combed the wooded areas surrounding the neighborhood, checking drainage ditches and vacant lots, operating under the tragic assumption that they were looking for a discarded, defenseless body that could not survive without its clinical routine. The physical scale of the search grew larger with every passing hour, entirely fueled by a massive community illusion that was about to completely dissolve under the weight of digital evidence. The electronic tracing of the inflammatory digital update immediately shifted the tactical focus of the investigation from a localized physical search to a targeted digital operation. The automated logs from the social media provider recorded the exact internet protocol address utilized to access the family profile at the time the message was transmitted. Within hours, federal cybercrime specialists mapped the unique numeric identifier to a residential routing unit leased by a commercial telecommunications provider operating in Big Bend, Wisconsin. The absolute distance of the signal confirmed that the digital interface was completely detached from the crime scene in Missouri, establishing a direct electronic link to a single-family home owned by the maternal relatives of Nicholas Godejohn. The jurisdictional complexity required immediate coordination between the Greene County Sheriff's Department and local tactical units in Waukesha County. Detectives initially operated under the operational theory that the missing young woman was being held captive inside the Wisconsin residence by a highly dangerous, digitally sophisticated predator who had successfully orchestrated the cross-state abduction. A containment perimeter was quietly established around the suburban property on the morning of June 15th, utilizing unmarked surveillance vehicles to monitor the exits. The physical indicators at the scene, including the absence of any specialized medical transport vehicles or accessible ramps, suggested the occupants were completely unprepared for a long-term medical care scenario, a detail that heightened the tactical urgency for a rapid entry. The entry was executed with extreme precision by a localized weapons and tactics team, breaching the front door after a brief standoff period. The tactical sweep of the interior did not reveal a violent hostage situation or a barricaded suspect. Instead, officers encountered two individuals sitting quietly in a rear bedroom, surrounded by standard travel luggage and an assortment of unboxed digital devices. The physical condition of the young woman completely upended the foundational assumptions of the entire law enforcement apparatus. She was standing entirely unaided, moving across the room with standard physical agility, completely detached from the clinical necessity of a wheelchair, oxygen tanks, or leg braces. The high-pitched, infantile voice she had used in public was replaced by a standard adult speech pattern, a physical transformation that's signaling the total collapse of the missing person narrative. The structural search of the Wisconsin bedroom yielded a dense concentration of physical evidence that completely reconstructed the logistics of the escape. Inside a standard nylon backpack, investigators recovered a heavy, fixed-blade knife wrapped in multiple layers of protective plastic, its surface still carrying microscopic biological material that matched the victim's profile. The luggage contained several $100s in cash denominations, a collection of digital storage drives, and a cheap synthetic wig that had been utilized to alter the young woman's appearance during the interstate bus transit. The absolute lack of any prescription pharmaceuticals or specialized feeding apparatus within the personal effects confirmed that the entire medical lifestyle had been completely abandoned the moment the front door in Springfield closed. The subsequent interrogation sessions, conducted in separate interview rooms at the local precinct, exposed a deep psychological fracture between the two co-conspirators. Nicholas Godejohn initially attempted to shelter his partner from structural accountability, telling the detectives he had acted entirely under his own volition to eliminate a perceived threat. His defensive posture rapidly eroded when investigators presented the synchronized logs extracted from their mobile devices, demonstrating a highly organized, multi-year correspondence focused entirely on the planning of the homicide. The digital record exposed a systematic division of labor, proving the daughter had acted as the operational director who provided the floor plans, identified the weapon, and managed the timing, while the young man served strictly as the physical executor of the plan. The investigative breakthrough forced a comprehensive review of historical medical files across multiple states, revealing a profound systemic vulnerability within the healthcare network. Detectives traveling to Louisiana uncovered that the original hospital records from Gypsy's early childhood had been completely destroyed during the widespread flooding of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. This environmental catastrophe had inadvertently provided DD with a clean slate, allowing her to invent a completely undocumented medical history every time she approached a new clinical facility. When a specialized pediatric neurologist in Springfield eventually grew highly suspicious of the muscular dystrophy diagnosis in 2007, noting that the girl's muscle tone was completely inconsistent with the disease and that all clinical testing yielded entirely negative results. He simply recorded his doubts in a private file, hesitant to challenge a mother who appeared so single-mindedly devoted to her daughter's survival in the wake of a national disaster. The digital reconstruction of the suspect's computer hardware revealed a highly active online footprint that exposed the true depth of her hidden autonomy. Under multiple distinct pseudonyms, the young woman had managed several secret profiles across various digital forums, interacting with dozens of individuals without her mother's knowledge. The correspondence proved she possessed a sophisticated understanding of her own physical capabilities and adult desires, completely detached from the infantile persona displayed during public fundraising events. The historical data demonstrated that the decision to employ violence was not a sudden, impulsive reaction to an immediate crisis, but the final, desperate calculation of a young adult who viewed the total elimination of her caregiver as the only viable mechanism to secure her physical independence. The legal resolution of the conspiracy began with a stark division of accountability inside the Greene County Courthouse. Medical evaluations entered into the record confirmed the historical presence of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a severe form of pathological abuse where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in a dependent to gain attention and validation. This clinical reality heavily influenced the state's prosecutorial strategy, transforming the daughter from a calculated, cold-blooded mastermind into a severely traumatized victim of lifelong torture. In July 2015, she accepted a structured plea negotiation, entering a guilty plea to second-degree murder in exchange for a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison, a resolution that many in the legal community viewed as exceptionally lenient given the brutal mechanics of the execution. The judicial trajectory for Nicholas Godejohn followed a completely different, unyielding path. His defense team attempted to argue diminished capacity, presenting psychological profiles that detailed his low cognitive functioning and total vulnerability to manipulation. The state, however, countered with the exhaustive text message archives, demonstrating a clear, premeditated intent to deploy lethal force for personal gain. In November 2018, a jury rejected the arguments of mitigation, convicting him of first-degree murder. The judge subsequently handed down a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring the physical executor of the contract would remain permanently separated from society. The empty pink wheelchair remains the enduring symbol of a case where physical captivity was dismantled only through the total destruction of a human life. The psychological architecture of the Springfield home demonstrated that the deepest horrors do not always stem from conventional neglect, but from an aggressive, pathologically distorted version of maternal care. A young woman managed to cross the boundary into the physical world on her own 2 feet. Yet the ultimate irony of her trajectory is absolute. She could only discover her true physical autonomy, her adult identity, and her release from a manufactured medical purgatory by occupying a concrete cell inside a state penitentiary. Please like this video and share your thoughts about this case in the comments. Be sure to check out our previous videos as well. See you soon.